He introduced her at his own dinner table, not as a colleague, not as a friend, as his woman. Kang Jae-hyun stood at the head of the table, the same table where Amara had served tea to his partners for 9 years, and rested his hand on the waist of a woman half her age. He smiled, the kind of smile he never once gave his wife. Around the table, men who had eaten Amara's food accepted her quiet hospitality, sat in silence. Some looked away. One actually raised his glass. Amara stood in the doorway, still holding her umbrella, rain dripping onto the marble floor she had chosen herself. She did not cry. She did not speak. She walked to the table, set her wedding ring down beside the flower arrangement she had ordered that morning, and walked back into the storm. Jae-hyun didn't even turn around. If you have ever swallowed something that would have destroyed someone else, if you have ever been the person in the room that nobody saw, stay with me. Hit that like button, drop your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because what Kang Jae-hyun didn't know that night, what he couldn't have imagined standing there with his hand on another woman's waist, was that the quiet woman walking out into the rain had already built the door she was walking through. He just never noticed her building it. This is her story. The rain had been falling since mid-afternoon, the kind of steady soul rain that doesn't announce itself dramatically, just arrives and refuses to leave. Amara Brooks Kong had taken the subway back from the National Folk Museum, where she had spent the day consulting on a damaged Joseon-era silk panel, a job she had not advertised to anyone in her husband's world, and had been quietly taking for 8 months. Her hands still faintly smelled of the conservation solvent she used to stabilize the dye. She noticed that on the subway, rubbing her fingers together without thinking, a habit she'd developed over years of working with fragile things. She knew there was a dinner tonight. Jae-hyun had mentioned it 4 days ago in the way he mentioned most things to her now, not as information, but as instruction. There's a dinner Friday. Be home by 7. She had come home by 7. She had in fact arranged the centerpiece herself that morning before leaving, white peonies and dried persimmon branches, because the housekeeper always chose chrysanthemums, and Jae-hyun hated chrysanthemums, though he had never told the housekeeper that. Amara knew because she paid attention. She had always paid attention. She was good at noticing things other people missed. She understood now walking up the steps of the mansion in the rain, both her greatest skill and the central tragedy of the last 9 years. The front door was unlocked. She could hear voices from the main dining room, men's laughter, the particular kind that fills a room with authority, and she assumed she was simply late to the gathering, that she would slip inside, dry her hands, appear at the table and pour tea, and absorb whatever mild irritation Jae-hyun directed her way for the slight delay. It was a rhythm she knew. She had learned to move through it efficiently, the way you learn to navigate a room in the dark. She pushed the dining room door open. The first thing she saw was the arrangement, her peonies, her persimmon branches, exactly where she had placed them. The second thing she saw was Jae-hyun at the head of the table, and the woman sitting beside him where Amara normally sat, and his hand resting at the woman's waist, thumb moving slightly in the way people touch each other when they've stopped trying to hide. She recognized 3 of the men at the table: Director Lim, who had attended their wedding; Park Sung-mo, who had brought Amara a gift from Busan on her 40th birthday, a small ceramic bowl she still kept on her windowsill; and Baek Tae-jun, Jae-hyun's consigliere, and the man who had once told her, in the careful tone of someone delivering a warning disguised as a compliment, that she was the most composed woman he had ever met. None of them spoke. Jae-hyun turned. He saw her. Something crossed his face. Not guilt, she noticed, not exactly. More like the mild calculation of a man rearranging a situation in his head. He straightened slightly. He said, in Korean, "You're late." Not, "I can explain." Not, "I should have told you." Not her name. "You're late." The woman beside him glanced up. She was perhaps 30, with the kind of face that people in Jae-hyun's world called strategic, beautiful in a way that cost money to maintain, self-possessed in a way that suggested she understood exactly where she was sitting and why. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked, if Amara was reading it correctly, faintly curious. Amara stood in the doorway for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. She had imagined something like this before. Not this exact scene, but a version of it, in the abstract way that you prepare yourself for something you don't want to acknowledge you're expecting. She had played out variations in her head during subway rides, during long evenings alone in the upstairs study, during the 18 months she had been quietly, methodically, surgically dismantling her financial dependence on this man and this house. She had thought, when the moment comes, I will probably cry. I will probably say something I regret. I will probably shake. She was not shaking. What she felt, standing in that doorway with rain still damp on the back of her neck, was something she had not predicted and did not have a clean word for. It was close to clarity. The sensation of a question you have been circling for years finally being answered, not with relief exactly, but with the particular exhausted recognition of someone who already knew. She walked to the table. Director Lim moved slightly in his chair. Park Sung-mo looked down at his glass. Baek Tae-jun watched her with the focused stillness of a man assessing risk. The centerpiece she had arranged that morning was in the middle of the table. She stopped beside it. She reached up and removed her wedding ring, a wide band of white gold that Jae-hyun had selected without asking her preference, as he selected most things, and she set it on the marble beside the persimmon branch. She did not look at Jae-hyun when she did it. She looked at the ring, she took one breath, and then she turned and walked back out of the room, through the front door, and into the rain. Nobody said anything, not even Jae-hyun. She heard him faintly, as the door swung closed behind her. He said, and she could not tell if it was to the room, or to the woman, or to no one, "She'll come back." Amara walked down the steps and into the dark. She had 47,000 won in her coat pocket, enough for a taxi and a meal and not much else, which was by design. She did not keep large amounts of cash at the mansion, and she had not kept anything in the joint account for 14 months. Everything was elsewhere. Everything had been moved quietly, methodically, document by document, signature by signature, across the 18 months she had spent turning a secret into a structure. She flagged a taxi at the corner and gave the driver an address in Insadong, not her final destination, but a safe intermediate point, a cafe owned by a woman she trusted who kept a back room available and did not ask unnecessary questions. Her hands were steady on her lap. The driver had the radio on, something slow and instrumental. Rain on the windshield. The city moving past in wet streaks of orange and white. She had not eaten since noon. She noticed this the way she noticed the ring was gone from her finger, as information rather than emergency. Her phone buzzed. A message from a contact she'd labeled simply KBT, Baek Tae-jun, the consigliere. The message was 3 words in Korean. "Are you safe?" She stared at it for a moment. Then she put the phone face down on her knee. Tae-jun was not her ally. He was not her enemy. He was something more complicated. A man who respected competence instinctively and had watched her exhibit it for 9 years without ever openly acknowledging it. She had noticed his quality. She had filed it away, the way she filed things. Whether he was asking because Jae-hyun told him to or because he was genuinely asking was a distinction she would figure out later. There would be a later. She was making sure of that. The taxi dropped her in Insadong at 8:45. She walked 3 blocks in the rain, her shoes soaking through by the second block, and pushed open the glass door of a small cafe called Silsa. The woman behind the counter looked up. Mid-50s, short gray-threaded hair, the kind of expression that said she had seen more than she would ever discuss, and said, in English, "Back room's open." Amara nodded. "Thank you, Miss Yoon." "Did you eat?" "Not since noon." Miss Yoon reached under the counter without another word and began making something. Amara went into the back room and sat down at the small wooden table and did something she had not permitted herself to do in the car or in the mansion or on the front steps. She let her face do what it wanted. It did not do what she expected. She did not cry. She pressed her hands flat on the table and felt the grain of the wood under her palms and breathed. And what came out of her chest was not grief exactly. It was something older and more complicated. The feeling of a weight you've been carrying so long you no longer experience it as weight, but simply as your own body. And then suddenly it is gone. And you don't feel lighter. You feel the phantom heaviness, and underneath it, something unfamiliar. Something that might be space. Miss Yoon brought in a bowl of doenjang jigae and a plate of rice and set them down without ceremony. She pulled out the chair across from Amara and sat. "How bad?" she asked. Amara looked at the food. Her stomach was tighter than she'd realized. He introduced her to the families. At the dinner table, his hand on her waist. She paused. With my flower arrangement in the middle of the table. Miss Yoon said nothing for a moment. Then, the persimmon branches? The persimmon branches. Miss Yoon exhaled slowly through her nose. You should eat. Amara ate. Her name before the marriage had been Amara Brooks. She had kept it hyphenated, Brooks Kong, a compromise she'd thought was generous at the time, and now recognized as symptomatic of the entire marriage, which was built on her compressions and his assumptions. She had come to Seoul at 31 on a fellowship for textile conservation, an extremely specific expertise that most people in Jae-hyun's world had never considered as a serious profession, which suited her perfectly because it meant nobody looked closely. She had met Jae-hyun at an auction, legitimate, one of the rare spaces where his world and her world briefly overlapped, both of them examining the same damaged 18th century court robe in a glass case. He had not known what he was looking at. She had. She explained it to him, not because she thought he was important, simply because she found it difficult to stand next to someone misinterpreting something she understood. He found that quality interesting enough to pursue her for 6 weeks before she agreed to a first date. She had not, at 31, known what he was. Not fully. She had known he was wealthy in ways that didn't fully disclose themselves, that he moved through rooms as if people had already agreed in advance to step aside for him, that he had the particular calibrated charm of a man who learned early that charm was a tool. She had thought these were warning signs she could manage. She was wrong about what she could manage, and right about them being warning signs. The marriage had begun well enough, in the way that marriages begin between two people who are genuinely interested in each other, but have not yet discovered the specific shapes of their incompatibilities. Jae-hyun was not a cruel man in the conventional sense, who was not physically threatening. He was simply someone for whom other people's interiority did not register as information he needed. He heard Amara when she spoke. He simply did not listen in the way that accumulates into knowledge. After 9 years, he could not have told you her mother's name. He could not have told you what she did all day. He could not have told you, with any specificity, what she cared about. She had stopped expecting him to know. What she had not expected was the night she walked in and found evidence that while he could not describe his own wife's face when she was concentrating, he had apparently found sufficient time and attention to establish an entire parallel arrangement with someone else. She thought about that now, eating the jjigae Miss Yoon had made, and what she felt was not betrayal. Or rather, it was betrayal, but not surprise, and the difference between those two things turned out to be enormous. She had begun separating her finances 16 months ago. Not because she knew what would happen, because she was a woman who paid attention to material reality, and the material reality of her marriage had been telling her something for years, and she had finally listened. Her mother had called it keeping your own floor under you. Loretta Brooks had said it once, when Amara was 22, sitting at a kitchen table in Atlanta, and Amara had written it off as her mother's pragmatism. Now it felt like prophecy. Loretta was gone, 4 years now, a fast cancer that moved through her in 8 months. But she had left behind, as it turned out, considerably more than the ceramic bowl from Busan and the framed photograph of the two of them at a textile fair in Milan. She had left a trust. Investments. A silk mill outside Gyeongju that Amara had not known about until the attorneys contacted her 6 months after the funeral, patient and formal, explaining that a property had been in the family's name for longer than Amara realized, that her mother had acquired it quietly through a holding company, that it had been waiting. Amara had driven to Gyeongju on a Tuesday morning and stood outside an abandoned building that had not operated in decades and felt, she could only describe it as recognition, the way you sometimes encounter something you've never seen before and understand it anyway. She had not told Jae-hyun. That omission had taken effort at first, and then less effort, and then none at all. Because Jae-hyun did not ask what she was doing with her days. He did not ask where she went. He had, slowly and without announcement, stopped being curious about her life, and she had simply moved her life into the space his disinterest created. Now she sat in the back room of a cafe in Insadong at 9:30 on a rainy Friday night, and she was, she thought, possibly the least destroyed she had ever felt in the aftermath of something that should have destroyed her. That told her something. She filed it. Her phone buzzed again. A different contact this time. Her attorney, Ha-ji-soo, 48, precise, the kind of woman who did not waste sentences, had sent a single message. The paperwork is ready whenever you say so. Amara set down her spoon, looked at the phone, looked at the wall, thought about Jae-hyun's voice behind the closing door. She'll come back. The certainty in it, the way it wasn't a wish but an assessment, the way he had said it, the way he said most things, as if the world were simply going to conform to his expectation. She picked up the phone. She typed back, Monday morning. She put the phone down and finished her meal. Outside, the rain was easing, not stopping, just softening, the way rain sometimes does when it said what it came to say. Amara Brooks Kong sat in the warm back room of a cafe she'd visited for years without her husband knowing it existed, in a city she had built a life in without his help, preparing to walk through a door he had never seen her building. She thought about her mother's silk mill. The roof had needed replacing. She had replaced it. The east wall had shown water damage through the stone. She had had it repaired. The original loom frames, 6 of them, massive and intact, had still been there under canvas covers, as if someone had simply put them to sleep and expected someone to wake them up eventually. Amara had stood in that building on a Tuesday morning with her hands in her coat pockets and decided that someone was going to be her. Jae-hyun was in the mansion right now. She could picture it exactly. The dinner winding down, the families filing out, the woman at his side, the ring still on the marble beside the persimmon branches. He would be telling himself a story. She knew the story. It was the story where she was dependent and he was indispensable, and the natural order of things would reassert itself by morning. The story he had never bothered to verify. Miss Yoon appeared in the doorway. Guest rooms available. You should sleep. I have somewhere to go, Amara said. Tonight? Tomorrow. She looked at Miss Yoon. Tonight I need to make a few calls. Ms. Yoon nodded once, the kind of nod that means, I know, and I'm not asking, and the guest room is available if you change your mind. Amara reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. Paper, not digital, a habit she'd maintained specifically because paper leaves no traceable record in a household where she had always assumed, probably rightly, that nothing was fully private. She opened it to a page near the back covered in her careful handwriting. Dates, numbers, names, the quiet architecture of an exit she had been constructing for over a year. She looked at the first item on the list. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. It rang twice. Attorney Ha, she said when the line connected. I know it's late. I need to walk through the timeline one more time. The voice on the other end was awake, alert, utterly unsurprised. I've been expecting your call. Where do you want to start? Amara looked at the notebook, at the list that began with her mother's name and ended with the name of the silk mill and everything she had built inside it. From the beginning, she said. Let's make sure we haven't missed anything. Attorney Ha Ji-soo had a habit of leaving one lamp on in her office, no matter what time she left, because she had learned over 22 years of practice that the nights clients finally made their decisions were rarely convenient ones. The lamp was on when Amara called. It was on because Ha Ji-soo had been sitting under it for the past 3 hours with a glass of barley tea gone cold beside her keyboard, reviewing, for the 4th time that week, a document set she had been preparing for 14 months. She had known this call was coming. She had not known it would be tonight, but she had known it would be soon because she had developed, over 2 decades of representing women in complicated situations involving complicated men, a specific instinct for the moment when a client stopped calculating and started moving. Walk me through the trust documentation first, Amara said. Her voice was flat and even in a way that Ha Ji-soo recognized as controlled rather than calm. There was a difference. She had learned to hear it. The Loretta Brooks family trust is clean, Ha Ji-soo said, pulling the file without looking. She knew it by feel at this point. Established in your mother's name 11 years ago, transferred to your sole ownership at time of death, legally categorized as inherited personal property under Korean Civil Code. He has no claim to it. There is no argument he can make. He'll try to make one anyway. He can try. He'll lose. Ha Ji-soo paused. The silk mill deed? Registered under Brooks Heritage Holdings. My signature only. His name is nowhere on it. The restoration contracts? Museum of Korean Craft signed in March. The Liam in April. The Gyeongju National Museum last month. Amar's voice didn't change. all under my professional credentials. None reference the syndicate or Jae Hyun's business interests. Ha-ji-soo set down her pen. Amara, he doesn't know about any of this. It wasn't a question. He never asked, Amara said. There was a pause on the line. Ha-ji-soo had heard a lot of things in her career. Rage, desperation, calculated maneuvering dressed up as grief. But what she heard in those 3 words was something quieter and more damaging than any of them. Not bitterness, just the clean factual statement of a woman who had been invisible inside her own life for so long that invisibility had become her most effective tool. Monday morning, Ha-ji-soo said. I'll have the filing ready by 8. 8 is fine. Are you somewhere safe tonight? Yes. Ha-ji-soo believed her. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to feel very long. Amara said goodnight and ended the call. She sat in Ms. Yoon's back room for another 20 minutes, not thinking, or rather thinking in the way that isn't really thinking, but is the mind doing its own maintenance work in the background while the surface stays quiet. She went through her notebook one more time. Every item had a small mark beside it. Not a check mark, she never used check marks, but a small horizontal line, the kind you make when you're confirming something is where you left it. Everything had its line. Everything was in order. She closed the notebook and put it back in her bag and went to sleep in the guest room Ms. Yoon had offered, in a narrow bed with a window that faced an alley, and she slept deeply and without dreaming, which was not what she expected, but was, she thought later, exactly what her body had decided it needed. Across the city, in the mansion, the dinner had ended badly. Jae-hyun knew it had ended badly the moment Park Sung-mo left without shaking his hand. In 12 years of association, Park had never left without shaking his hand. It was ritual. It was the kind of ritual that meant something in this world precisely because everyone understood it was optional. You shook the hand or you didn't, and everyone in the room understood what the difference meant. Park had nodded at Jae-hyun from across the room, put on his coat, and walked out. Director Lim had been warmer, or at least more practiced. A brief handshake, a neutral expression, the word evening offered without elaboration. Tae-jun had seen them all out, and then come back into the dining room where Jae-hyun was standing at the window with a glass of whiskey, looking at the rain. The woman, her name was Seo Yuna, and she had the intelligence to understand that the evening had not gone the way Jae-hyun intended, had excused herself to the guest suite without being asked. That, at least, showed judgment. Tae-jun stood in the doorway. He was 51 years old, a narrow man with a face that gave nothing away unless he chose to give it, and he had been with Jae-hyun for 18 years, long enough to have seen him make exactly 4 serious errors in judgment. He was looking at what he believed was the 5th. Say it, Jae-hyun said, without turning from the window. Park is going to call you tomorrow, Tae-jun said. He won't say what tonight was about. He'll bring up something else. The Incheon arrangement, probably, but that's what it'll be about. Park can manage his own discomfort. He didn't look uncomfortable. He looked offended. Jae-hyun turned. At what? Tae-jun looked at him for a moment, the particular look of a man deciding how honest to be. At the fact that you introduced a woman to these families before you'd handled your wife. In this world, that's not a personal matter. That's a sequence problem. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened slightly. Amara is handled. Is she? She left. She'll be back by morning. Tae-jun said nothing. He walked to the table and picked up the wedding ring that was still sitting beside the persimmon branch. He held it up and looked at it, not dramatically, just examining it the way you examine something you're trying to understand. She didn't take it with her, Jae-hyun said. She left it. That's a statement. Women make statements. Then they come back. Tae-jun set the ring down. Where would she go? She has no money, no family here, no... She had a consultation at the National Folk Museum today. Tae-jun's voice was even. It was her 4th this year. They pay her per session. Jae-hyun went very still. How do you know that? Because I pay attention to things in this house. Tae-jun met his eyes. Someone has to. The silence between them was not comfortable. It was the silence of 2 men who had operated together long enough that they no longer needed to perform civility with each other, which meant there was nothing to soften what was actually being said. You think she has resources, Jae-hyun said. I think I don't know what she has. And I think that is a problem, because you don't know either. Jae-hyun set his glass down on the table harder than he intended. She's been my wife for 9 years. I think I know. You didn't know she was consulting for the folk museum. You didn't know about the fourth visit. What else don't you know? Taejun's voice didn't rise. It never rose. That was what made it effective. I'm not criticizing your marriage. I'm telling you that if she decides to be difficult, and if she has resources we're not aware of, it creates exposure. For the business, for the families, he paused. Park Sung-mo doesn't care about your love life. He cares about stability. Jae-hyun looked at the ring on the table. He had not thought, in the moment he placed his hand on Yuna's waist, about sequence. He had thought about the fact that he was tired of performing a marriage that had become, for him, a formality, and that for once he did not want to perform. He had thought about the satisfaction of being seen clearly, of not having to maintain the careful separation between his public face and his private life. He had not thought about Park Sung-mo's handshake. He had not thought about Amara's face either, not the expression she wore when she walked in, not the quality of her silence, not the 4 seconds she stood in the doorway doing, "What?" He had told himself shock. He told himself that now, shock, and then wounded pride, and by morning the practical reality would reassert itself. But Taejun was still standing there with that particular stillness that meant he wasn't done. "What?" Jae-hyun said. "I sent her a message, asking if she was safe." "You what?" She didn't respond. Taejun straightened his jacket. "I'm going to find out where she is. Not to bring her back. Just to know." He paused at the door. "You should think about whether you actually know this woman, or whether you just knew who you needed her to be." He left. Jae-hyun stood in the dining room with his whiskey and the ring and the arrangement of peonies and persimmon branches that his wife had put together that morning, and he thought, with the particular frustration of a man who is not accustomed to feeling that he has missed something, "She'll come back." He said it out loud, quietly, to the empty room. The persimmon branches didn't argue. Monday arrived with the specific cruelty of clear weather after rain, bright, cold, indifferent. Amara was at Ha Ji-soo's office on the 14th floor of a building in Gangnam at 7:55, wearing the same coat she'd left in Friday night but different shoes, because she had gone to a small apartment in Mapogu where she had been paying rent for 8 months under her professional name, and where she kept a second set of clothes, documents, and a go-bag that contained everything she needed to not be dependent on the mansion for another 48 hours. She had been planning. She had been planning for a long time. Ha Ji-soo had the documents ready in 2 stacks. The filing itself was 3 pages. The supporting documentation, trust records, property deeds, contract registry, financial separation evidence, was considerably thicker. Ha Ji-soo walked her through each section once, efficient and without embellishment, and Amara signed where the tabs indicated and initialed where the law required and did not ask questions she already knew the answers to because she had asked them 6 months ago and 4 months ago and again last week. "This will be served today," Ha Ji-soo said. "By 4 o'clock. Amara nodded. "He's going to want to negotiate." "He's going to want to make it go away," Amara said. "Those are different things." Ha Ji-soo allowed herself a brief expression, not quite a smile, but its disciplined cousin. "Yes, they are." She set down her pen. "Are you ready for what happens when he realizes he can't?" Amara thought about that for a moment. Not the question of whether she was ready. She knew she was ready. She had made herself ready, over 18 months of careful work. But the more complicated question underneath it, which was, ready for what, exactly? Ready for the part where the man she had spent 9 years beside stopped seeing her as a formality and started seeing her as a problem? Ready for the part where his world, which was a world built on controlled force and managed intimidation, turned that machinery toward her? She was ready. She was also not naive about what that meant. "I have documentation of every instance of financial control he exercised during the marriage," she said. "Every joint account withdrawal he made unilaterally. Every contract he signed using my name without my explicit sign-off. See. I have been building this case longer than I was planning to leave." Ha Ji-soo looked at her. "You knew this was coming." "I suspected. I prepared. There's a difference." Amara picked up her copy of the filing. "He told the room she'd come back. I heard him through the door." "You were still there when he said that?" for about 4 seconds. She tucked the papers into her bag. He was speaking to the room. He wasn't worried. He had the tone he uses when he's already decided how something ends. She looked at Hajisu. That tone is going to be a problem for him. Hajisu nodded slowly. Because he's not going to prepare. Because he doesn't think he needs to. The papers were served at 3:47 in the afternoon, while Jae-hyun was in a meeting with 3 members of the syndicate's legitimate holding structure. A meeting about the acquisition of a hotel property in Busan that had been in negotiation for 6 months. His assistant knocked and entered anyway, which was itself a signal, because his assistant knew better than to interrupt that particular kind of meeting. And the fact that she did it meant something had happened that she had calculated as more urgent than his irritation. She handed him the envelope. She left. He recognized the firm's name on the return address because Tae-jun had mentioned it the previous night. Haji-soo, one of a small group of attorneys in Seoul who handled divorce proceedings for high-net-worth clients with criminal-adjacent profiles. Tae-jun had mentioned it because Tae-jun had apparently been doing research over the weekend that Jae-hyun had not authorized and had not known to want. He opened the envelope at the table in front of the 3 men who went very quiet. He read the first page. He read it again. One of the men, Oh Byung-suk, who handled the holding company structure and had a talent for reading numbers quickly, leaned slightly forward and then caught himself and leaned back. Jae-hyun set the papers face down on the table. He said, in a voice that was entirely controlled, "We'll continue this tomorrow." He stood. The men stood. They left without requiring further explanation. Tae-jun was in the hallway. "You knew," Jae-hyun said. "I knew she had retained counsel. I didn't know she'd already filed." "She filed this morning." Jae-hyun held up the envelope. "She has an attorney who specializes in criminal-adjacent high-net-worth cases, which means the attorney already knows everything, which means Amara—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. She told the attorney everything. Attorneys have confidentiality obligations. It doesn't leave the office. That's not the point. He turned and walked toward his office. Tae-jun followed. The door closed. The point is that she built a case. Not last Friday, not last month. She has been building a case. He dropped the envelope on his desk. How long has she had the attorney? Based on the firm's records. Tae-jun paused. I believe approximately 14 months. Jae-hyun sat down. Not the careful sit of a man maintaining composure. The heavy sit of a man whose body made a decision his mind was still catching up to. 14 months, he said. Yes. She started this 14 months ago. That's what I believe. Jae-hyun looked at the ceiling. He was not in that moment angry, or not only angry. He was experiencing something underneath the anger that he was not practiced at identifying, which was the sensation of discovering that your understanding of a situation was not just incomplete, but structurally wrong. He had been operating for at least 14 months inside a story that was not the story that was actually happening. He had believed himself to be the only one who knew where the walls were, and the walls had been moving, and he had not noticed. What does she have? He asked. The trust is entirely separate. Korean inheritance law protects it fully. It was transferred to her at her mother's death. He has no claim. The property in Gyeongju. Tae-jun stopped. Jae-hyun looked up. What property in Gyeongju? There is a silk mill outside the city. It's been registered under a holding company in her name for. Tae-jun checked his phone. The deed transfer was processed 18 months ago. The renovation permit started 14 months ago. The room was very quiet. She has a silk mill, Jae-hyun said. She has a restored silk mill with active commercial contracts. The filing includes documentation of 3 museum agreements. Jae-hyun stood up slowly. He walked to the window. A different window from Friday night. A different view, but the same rain-washed city, the same sharp gray of a Seoul autumn. He stood there for a long time. She built a company, he said. Not loud, almost to himself. Brooks Heritage Atelier, registered as a textile restoration firm, apparently operational for several months. Tae-jun's voice was careful. Careful in the way of a man who has prepared himself to deliver information to someone who will not enjoy receiving it. The Lium has publicly credited her work on 2 restorations. There are institutional references. She's known in this world. In her world. Yes. Jae-hyun turned from the window. His face had the quality of a man in the specific kind of pain that comes not from loss but from recalibration, the grinding internal effort of revising a picture you had trusted completely. I looked at her every day for 9 years, he said. Taejun said nothing. He had learned over 18 years that there were moments when nothing was the correct response. I looked at her every day and I didn't. Jae-hyun stopped. His jaw worked. She was building it in this city. She was doing it here, and I didn't. No, Taejun said quietly. You didn't. That word hung in the office like smoke. Jae-hyun stared at his consigliere. For a moment, something moved across his face that was too complicated to name, too layered, too many things pressing against each other at once. And then his expression closed, the way a door closes, and what was left was the face he wore when he had decided the feeling was not useful. Get me the full picture, he said. Everything she owns, everything that's hers. I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. And then? And then I'll decide how to respond. Taejun picked up the filing from the desk. He looked at it for a moment. Jae-hyun. She used Hajisu. That firm doesn't take cases they don't expect to win. Everyone expects to win at the beginning. This firm wins. He set the papers down. And she's not asking for the syndicate's assets. She's not asking for the penthouse. She's not asking for anything that connects to the business. He tapped the cover page. She's asking for her freedom and for the right to keep what was already hers. That's a very specific ask. A very strategic one. Jae-hyun looked at the papers. She doesn't want my money. She doesn't need your money. The silence that followed was the longest of the evening. Outside, Seoul moved through its Monday without interest in any of this. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment in Mapogu, Amara Brooks Kang was sitting at a second-hand desk with her conservation notebooks and her laptop and a cup of tea, reviewing the structural assessment report on the Gyeongju Mill's East Wing, making notes in her careful hand, preparing for a morning she had been moving toward for 18 months. Her phone had been ringing off and on since 4 o'clock. She was letting it ring, not from cruelty, not from satisfaction, simply because there was work to do. And the work had waited long enough, and she had learned, slowly, at real cost, over years of paying attention to what she needed and not giving it to herself, that the thing other people called ruthlessness was sometimes just the practice of not abandoning yourself in the middle of a sentence. She picked up her pen. She made a note about the East Wing. At 6:43 in the evening, Jae-hyun called for the third time. At 6:44, Amara set her phone face down. At 6:45, she turned the page. And somewhere in the architectural bones of an 18th century silk mill outside Gyeongju, the old loom frames stood under their canvas covers in the dark, waiting, as they had been waiting for decades, for the person who was going to wake them. The call came at 7:12 in the morning, 3 days after the filing. Amara was in Gyeongju. She had driven down the night before in the second-hand Hyundai she kept registered under Brooks Heritage Holdings, 4 hours south on roads that thinned and quieted as Seoul fell away behind her, and she had arrived at the mill after midnight and slept on the folding cot she kept in the side office, under 2 blankets that smelled of sawdust and old stone. She had slept well again. That kept surprising her, the sleeping well. She had expected the nights to be hard. Instead, they were the easiest part. She was standing in the East Wing with a thermal imaging report in one hand and a cup of gas station coffee in the other when her phone rang. The number was not in her contacts, but the area code was Seoul, and the prefix was one she recognized as belonging to the cluster of office buildings in Yeouido, where several of the syndicate's legitimate holdings operated. She almost didn't answer. She answered, "Mrs. Kang." The voice was male, mid-40s, formal in the clipped way of someone trained in corporate law rather than criminal adjacency. "My name is attorney Choi Dong-wook. I represent the Baiko Holdings Group. I'm calling as a professional courtesy before formal correspondence is initiated." Amara set her coffee on the stone windowsill. Outside, the morning was pale and cold, mist sitting low over the fields. "I'm listening." "We've completed a preliminary review of the separation filing submitted by your representative. We have identified several concerns we believe require immediate clarification." A pause. The kind of pause that was not uncertainty, but preparation. Specifically, the holding company under which the Gyeongju property is registered, Brooks Heritage Holdings, was incorporated during the period of your marriage, using communication infrastructure and professional contacts that may constitute marital assets under Korean civil law. Amar's hand tightened around the phone. Just slightly. Additionally, Choi continued, the museum contracts executed under your professional credentials reference consultation work performed in part during marital time, using transportation and logistical support that may be traced to shared household resources. Another pause. We are not asserting these claims definitively at this stage. We are informing you that the basis for your husband's counterclaim is more substantial than your filing may have anticipated. She stood very still in the east wing of the silk mill with the thermal imaging report in her hand, and the mist outside the window and the cold of the old stone floor coming up through the soles of her boots. Is that all? She said. For this call. Formal correspondence will follow by end of week. The line went dead. Amara lowered the phone. She looked at it for a moment, the black rectangle in her hand, perfectly neutral, indifferent to what had just moved through it. Then she looked up at the east wing wall, at the repaired stonework, at the point where the new mortar met the old, and you could see, if you knew where to look, the exact line between what had been damaged and what she had fixed. She had used the mansion's car service twice in the first 6 months. Twice, because she had not yet transferred the Hyundai registration and the mill was 4 hours south, and she had told herself it was practical and that twice was negligible and that no one would notice or remember. Someone had noticed. Someone had remembered. She called Hajisu before she had finished the thought. Hajisu's office at 8 in the morning had the quality of a room that had been running for hours already. When Amara's call came in, Hajisu was on her second cup of coffee and had 3 files open on her desk because she had received a courier delivery at 7:30. Preliminary correspondence from Baco Holdings' legal team, hand-delivered, which meant they had paid for urgency, which meant they wanted her to know they were serious before she'd had time to prepare. She had been expecting a call from Amara. She picked up on the first ring. I know, she said, before Amara could speak. The car service, twice, in the first 6 months. I received their preliminary this morning. Hajisu's voice was steady, but her pen was moving fast on the notepad beside her keyboard. They're going to argue the holding company was established using marital resources, your email, your phone, the car service twice, potentially the professional contacts you developed while living in the marital home. Those contacts are from my fellowship, before the marriage. You maintained and expanded them while married. They'll argue the maintenance constitutes marital contribution. Hajisu paused. It's a thin argument, but it's not nothing. Amara sat down on the folding cot. The thermal imaging report was still in her other hand. She set it on the floor. How thin? Thin enough that a good judge dismisses it. Not so thin that it can't slow us down. Hajisu was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone choosing between 2 versions of honesty. She chose the harder one. Amara, there's something else. Something in their correspondence I need to walk you through. Tell me. They've attached a property title search. For the Gyeongju mill specifically. Hajisu's pen stopped moving. The search shows a lien, registered 8 months ago, under a financial services company called Haedong Capital Partners. Amara's body went very still. I don't know that name. I know you don't. That's the problem. Hajisu's voice was careful now, careful in the way of someone delivering a weight rather than information. Haedong Capital Partners registered a lien against the Gyeongju property 8 months ago for a sum of 80 million won. The lien is registered as a secured debt instrument, which means before any asset division can occur, there cannot be a lien. Amar's voice came out harder than she intended. The mill was purchased outright. My mother's trust paid for the acquisition in full. There is no debt instrument on that property. The lien says otherwise. Then someone filed a fraudulent lien. Silence on the line. Then, very carefully. Yes, that's one possibility. Amara stood up. She walked to the east wing wall and put her free hand flat against the repaired stonework and pressed, as if the solidity of it could anchor something that was becoming unsolid. What's the other possibility? Hajisu took a breath. The lion is registered in a way that uses your mother's name as the originating debtor. It claims your mother borrowed against this property 8 months before she died, which would have been 3 years ago. It claims the debt passed to you as heir along with the asset. The cold of the stone came through Amara's palm. She pressed harder. My mother did not borrow against this property. She paid for it outright. I have the transaction records. I know, and we will challenge it. But Amara, Hajisu stopped, started again. Someone filed this lien using documentation that references your mother's financial records. Records that are not public. Records that would have required access to private financial information. Amara's hand came off the wall. She turned and looked at the mill around her, the repaired arches, the new lighting she'd had installed in October, the 6 loom frames still under their canvas covers in the far corner, waiting. She had spent 14 months building this. She had spent money she'd earned and money she'd inherited and time she'd carved out of a marriage that had stopped seeing her. And she had built something real inside these walls, something with contracts and institutional backing and a name that was hers. And someone had reached into it, quietly, 8 months ago, before she even filed. They knew, she said, not loud, almost to herself. They've known longer than I thought. Hajisu's pause confirmed it. Who at the syndicate would have access to my mother's financial records? Amara asked. That's what I need you to help me understand. She drove back to Seoul in 3 hours and 40 minutes, which was faster than the drive down and faster than was strictly safe on those roads. But her hands were steady on the wheel, and her mind was working the way it worked when she was treating a damaged textile, methodically, without emotion, tracing the damage back to its origin point, her mother's financial records. Loretta Brooks had been careful with her money in the way that women of her generation and background who had built their own security from scratch were careful, which was to say, meticulous, private, and deeply suspicious of institutions. She had used 3 separate financial advisors. She had maintained accounts in both the United States and South Korea. She had documented everything. The documentation had passed to Amara at death. The Korean financial records had been handled by a firm in Seoul, a small, discreet wealth management office in Jongno that had served foreign national clients for 30 years. The firm's name was Dongyang Wealth Partners. Amara had met with them twice after her mother's death, reviewed the records, signed the transfer paperwork. She had told no one at the mansion about those meetings. She was certain of that. She had taken the mansion's car service the first time she visited the mill. Yes, twice. She had been careless twice. But she had not told Jae-hyun or Tae-jun or anyone in the syndicate's orbit about the meetings with Dongyang. So how did someone have access to the records that Dongyang held? She thought about Tae-jun's message the night she left. Are you safe? 3 words, sent within 20 minutes of her walking out the door. She had read it as surprise. She was reconsidering that reading. She thought about the meeting with Oh Byung-suk, Jae-hyun's holding company manager, who had leaned forward when Jae-hyun opened the filing and then caught himself. She thought about the preliminary correspondence delivered to Haji-soo by hand courier at 7:30 in the morning, not sent digitally, hand-delivered, which required preparation the night before, which meant someone in Jae-hyun's legal structure had been preparing the response before the response was formally required. They had been ready. They had been ready because they had been watching. Not recently. For a while. She pulled off the highway at a rest stop outside Daejeon and sat in the parking lot with the engine running and her hands on the wheel and thought about the sequence. 14 months ago, she retained Haji-soo. 12 months ago, she began renovation at the mill. 8 months ago, someone filed a lien against the property using her mother's records. 8 months ago, 4 months into the renovation. 4 months into the work that she had been so careful to keep separate, so careful to route through clean channels, through accounts that bore only her name. Except for twice. Twice she had used this car service. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel for a moment. Not in despair. She didn't have the luxury of despair right now, and she was aware of that with a clarity that was almost cold, but in the specific physical acknowledgement of a mistake. She had made an error, a small one, an understandable one, and someone had been watching closely enough to catch it. She straightened up, pulled out her phone, called a number she had not used in 4 months. A private investigator named Kim Soo-hyun, who worked in a deliberate gray zone and charged accordingly and had done 2 jobs for her before, verifying the registration of the Haedong capital, Leon before she could know to verify it, and, no, that was wrong, she had not hired him for anything related to Haedong. She had hired him to trace the ownership structure of a property adjacent to the mill, a logistics question, nothing to do with the syndicate. He picked up on the second ring. Ms. Brooks? Haedong Capital Partners, she said. I need the ownership structure. Full trace all the way back. How fast? A pause. The sound of a chair moving. Define fast. 48 hours. That's expensive. I know. Another pause. Longer. I'll need 20% up front. I'll transfer it in an hour. She ended the call and pulled back onto the highway and drove the remaining 2 hours to Seoul with a specific cold knot sitting in the center of her chest that she did not try to resolve because resolving it required information she didn't yet have. Haji-soo was waiting for her in the office. So was a woman Amara had not expected to see. Her name was Park In-young, and she was 53 years old, and she was the senior partner of Dongyang Wealth Partners. She was sitting in the client chair across from Haji-soo's desk, with her coat still on and her hands folded in her lap. And when Amara walked through the door, she stood immediately, which was the first thing Amara noticed. And her face had the specific tight quality of someone who had traveled a distance they would not have traveled unless the reason was serious. "Ms. Park," Amara said. "I owe you an explanation," Park In-young said, "and an apology. I am very sorry that the explanation and the apology are arriving at the same time." Amara sat down in the chair beside her. Haji-soo closed the office door. 8 months ago, Park In-young said, a man came to our office. He presented credentials identifying him as a representative of Haedong Capital Partners, a financial services firm. He presented documentation claiming that Loretta Brooks had established a credit arrangement with Haedong prior to the Gyeongju property acquisition, that the purchase was partially financed rather than outright, and that the lien was a legitimate registered debt. Amara's hands were still in her coat pockets. She did not move them. "And your office verified this?" "We attempted to verify it." Park In-young's voice was even and ashamed simultaneously, which was not an easy combination to carry. "The documentation was, I have to be direct with you, it was very good. It used your mother's signature style accurately, referenced the correct account numbers, and was formatted consistently with the era and the firm's conventions. Our compliance officer reviewed it and passed it." She paused. "We should have called you. We should have contacted you before accepting any external party's claim about your mother's account. We did not. That was our failure." Amara looked at the window, then back at Park In-young. "You gave them access to her records." "The man was in our offices for approximately 2 hours. He was accompanied by a junior associate from our firm who has since—" Park In-young stopped. "Who has since resigned. We are investigating whether that associate was compensated externally." The office was very quiet. Amara thought about her mother, Loretta Brooks, who had spent 40 years building something quietly, carefully, in the margins of a world that did not watch her closely, who had bought a silk mill in South Korea because she believed her daughter would need a floor under her feet one day, who had been meticulous, who had been private, who had been gone for 4 years and could not defend her records. Someone had used her mother's name to build a weapon against her. That was the thing. That was the specific thing. Not the legal complexity, not the lien, not the holding company argument. Someone had reached back through the documents of a dead woman's life and used her mother's name. Amara felt something move through her chest that was not grief and not rage, and was actually more dangerous than either. The cold, focused clarity of a person who has just discovered exactly how far their opponent is willing to go. "Who sent him?" she said. Not a question. Park In-young looked down at her hands. The credentials he presented traced to a legitimate registered company. Haedong Capital Partners is real. It has a registered address in Mapogu, a minimal operating structure, and a founding date of 13 months ago. She paused. "Our investigative team looked into the company this morning after I called attorney Heye. The founding shareholding structure lists a single beneficial owner through a series of shell registrations." Haji-soo placed a single printed page on the desk in front of Amara. At the bottom of the chain, through 3 layers of registered holding companies, the beneficial owner of Haedong Capital Partners was a man named Oh Byung-suk, Jae-hyun's holding company manager, the man who had leaned forward at the table when the divorce papers arrived and then caught himself and leaned back. Amara looked at the name on the page for a long time. Oh Byung-suk had not acted alone. He was not a man who acted alone. He was a detail person, a structure person, someone who executed the architectures that other people designed, which meant someone had given him a design, which meant the lien, the fraudulent documentation, The 2-hour meeting in Dongyang's offices with the compromised associate, all of it had been authorized. All of it had been planned 13 months ago, 1 month after she retained Hajisu. They had known from the beginning. She did not know how. She would find out how. But for now, the fact was sitting in front of her on a printed page, and the fact was this: Kang Jae-hyun, or someone acting on his authority, had been preparing a counter-architecture against her departure for almost exactly as long as she had been preparing her departure, and they had done it by going through her mother. Hajisu spoke quietly. If it holds, encumbers the mill. The mill, if encumbered, becomes a disputed marital asset rather than an inherited property. A disputed asset cannot be transferred without resolution of the debt claim, which could take years, Amara said. In a contested proceeding, yes, 2 to 4 years, minimum. Amara looked at the printed page. She looked at Oh Byung-suk's name at the bottom of the chain. She looked at the date of Haedong Capitals Incorporation. 13 months ago, 1 month after she first walked into Hajisu's office and said, "I need to know exactly what belongs to me." 1 month. They had needed 1 month to start building the counter. She had needed 14 months to build the exit. She had thought that gave her the advantage of preparation. What it had actually given them was 14 months to watch her prepare and build something designed specifically to dismantle what she was building. She closed her eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough to feel the full weight of it and then set the weight down, because she could not carry it right now and also do what came next. She opened her eyes. "I need Kim Soo-hyun's report," she said, "and I need to know who the compromised associate is. Not to take action, to understand who they are and whether there are other points of access we haven't identified yet." She looked at Hajisu. "And I need to know if there's a way to challenge the lien on the basis of document fraud without revealing that we know Oh Byung-suk is the beneficial owner. Because if they know we've traced it back that far, they'll move the structure." Hajisu was already writing. "There is a way. It requires filing a separate fraud complaint through the Property Registration Authority, parallel to the divorce proceeding. It's slower. It's cleaner." She looked up. "And it requires evidence of the forgery, not just the ownership chain. We need the original documents that Haedong submitted to Dongyang compared against your mother's actual records." "I have her records," Amara said. "All of them. In a safety deposit box in Jongno. I've had them for 4 years. Park and-young looked up. "You kept originals?" "My mother told me to keep originals of everything." Amara picked up her bag. She said, "The person who has the paper usually wins." She stood. Hajisu and Park and-young stood with her. She looked at the printed page one more time, the chain of shell companies, Oh Byung-suk's name at the bottom, the date 13 months ago. And then she turned toward the door. "I need to make one call before we go to the deposit box," she said. "Give me 5 minutes." She stepped into the hallway, pulled out her phone, and dialed the number she had been choosing not to dial for 6 days. It rang once. Taejun answered. She said without greeting, without preamble, "I know about Haedong. I know about Oh Byung-suk, and I know this didn't happen without authorization." Her voice was steady, completely steady. "I am giving you one opportunity to tell me whether you were part of it, not for my sake, for yours. Because when this comes out in the fraud proceeding, and it will come out, the people who authorized it and the people who merely knew about it are going to be in very different positions." Silence on the line, long silence, the kind that tells you more than words. Then Taejun said very quietly, "I didn't authorize it." "But you knew." The silence this time was shorter. "I found out 4 months ago. I told him it was a mistake." "And?" "And he didn't listen." A pause, then lower. "He never thought you'd find it." Amara pressed her back against the hallway wall and looked at the ceiling and felt the full shape of the situation she was inside. Not just the legal exposure, not just the fraudulent lien, but the thing underneath all of it, which was that the man she had been married to for 9 years had, when faced with her departure, chosen to fight her using her dead mother's name. He had chosen that. Someone had brought him that option, and he had said yes. "I need the original authorization document," she said. "Whatever Oh Byung-suk received that told him to proceed. I need it in Hajisu's hands by Friday." Taejun said nothing. "Baek Taejun." Her voice was quiet and exact. "I am not asking for your loyalty. I am telling you what the correct decision is for a man who didn't authorize this and told his boss it was a mistake and is now standing at the edge of a fraud proceeding that will name everyone who touched this structure. You are smart enough to know what that means." Another long silence. "Friday," he said finally. The line went dead. Amara stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds. Then she put her phone in her pocket and walked back into Hajisu's office and said, "Let's go get the originals." The safety deposit box was at a branch in Jongno that Amara had visited exactly twice, once when she first transferred custody of her mother's records, and once 6 months ago to verify that everything was still there. The branch manager was a small, precise man named Choi, who remembered her because she had asked him, on her second visit, about their document authentication procedures, a question he had not been asked before and had taken seriously. He took her to the vault without requiring her to wait. The box contained a red accordion folder, 2 inches thick, rubber-banded in 3 places. Inside, Loretta Brooks's complete Korean financial history, bank statements, investment records. The original property acquisition documents for the Gyeongju Mill, notarized in Atlanta before her mother ever set foot in Korea. The deed transfer paperwork, the trust formation documents. And at the very back, in a separate sealed envelope that Amara had not opened since the day she placed it there, a letter in her mother's handwriting, dated 3 months before the diagnosis, that began, "Baby, if you are reading this at a bank rather than at my kitchen table, then something has gone sideways and you need to pay attention." Amara stood in the vault with the accordion folder open on the metal counter and ran her thumb across the top edge of the letter and did not open it. Not now. Not here. She put it back in the envelope and put the envelope back in the folder and took out only what Hajisu needed: the original acquisition records, the notarized deed, and a 12-page financial summary that Loretta's Atlanta attorney had prepared showing the complete source and movement of funds used to purchase the property. No debt, no credit instrument, no Haedong Capital Partners. No lion that predated the one filed 8 months ago by a man with a forged signature and a compromised associate, and the authorization of a crime organization that had decided a quiet woman's inheritance was a threat that needed to be neutralized. Hajisu looked at the documents for 4 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. "These are clean. I know they're clean. The notarization is Atlanta-based. The acquiring attorney is licensed in Georgia. The fund transfer is documented through 3 U.S. institutions." Hajisu set the papers down with the specific care of someone handling something they intend to use. "There is no world in which a Korean lion filed 8 months ago supersedes documentation of this quality. Unless the judge is theirs," Amara said. Hajisu looked at her directly. "I have not lost a property fraud case in 11 years. I do not intend to start." She paused. "But you're right that we need to be careful about venue. I'll file the fraud complaint through the Central District, not the local court where Beko Holdings has existing relationships. Can you do that?" "I can argue jurisdictional basis. The forgery used a U.S. citizen's records. International document fraud. It's not a certain win on venue, but it's legitimate and it buys us options." Hajisu was already on her phone, walking toward the vault door, her voice dropping into the clipped efficiency of a woman shifting from consultation into combat. "I need my paralegal. Don't go anywhere yet." Park In-young, who had come with them and stood quietly through the vault visit, waited until Hajisu was out of earshot and then said to Amara, "The associate who let the Haedong man into our records. His name is Lee Jun-seo. 27 years old. He resigned 4 days ago and we cannot locate him." Amara looked at her. "You think he's been moved?" "I think he was useful and is now a liability." Park In-young's voice was flat. "In my experience, people who become liabilities in that world do not resign to pursue other opportunities." Amara did not respond to that directly. She put her mother's documents back in the accordion folder, refastened the rubber bands, and handed the folder to the branch manager to return to the box. She kept the originals Hajisu needed. She kept the letter in her coat pocket without deciding why. "Find him if you can," she said to Park In-young, "through whatever channel you have. If he's reachable and he's scared, a scared man with documentation is more useful to us than a disappeared one." Park In-young nodded once. They walked out of the bank into the Jongno afternoon, cold and bright. The street loud with the particular compressed energy of a city that does not slow down for anyone's private crisis. And Amara stood on the sidewalk for a moment and felt the weight of the accordion folder's absence in her hands and thought, now it moves fast. Whatever comes next, it moves fast. Because they know she found the lien. Because Taejun had called her back and said Friday, which meant by Thursday morning, Jae-hyun would know that Taejun had said Friday, and by Thursday afternoon, the structure would start moving. She had perhaps 72 hours before everything accelerated beyond the pace she could control. She started walking. Friday came in like something that had been building pressure for a week and finally ran out of patience. Taejun delivered a thumb drive to Haji-su's office at 8:45 in the morning, handed to the receptionist by a man Amara did not recognize, no note, no contact information. Haji-su called Amara at 9:03. "It's here." Amara was already in the car. The thumb drive contained a single PDF, 14 pages, internal document formatting, the Beko Holdings letterhead at the top of the first page and at the bottom of page 2, a handwritten authorization signature that Amara had seen on 9 years of household documents, on the marriage certificate, on the syndicate's official correspondence that sometimes passed through the mansion, and that she had read, because she read everything, because reading everything was the only way to know where you actually were. Kang Jae-hyun's signature. Authorizing the creation of Haedong Capital Partners, authorizing the lien filing. Dated 13 months ago, 1 month after she walked into Haji-su's office for the first time. Haji-su read the document twice. She placed it on her desk. She folded her hands over it. "With this, the originals, and the Dongyang breach documentation," she said, "we have a fraud case." "Is it enough to move the lien?" "It's enough to file criminal charges." Haji-su looked at her steadily. "Not just remove the lien. Criminal charges, document forgery, fraudulent lie-in registration, potentially conspiracy, against Oh Byung-suk as executor and against Kang Jae-hyun as authorizing party." The office was very quiet. Amara looked at the authorization document. She thought about the fact that the man who signed it had also, on a rainy Friday night 3 weeks ago, turned to a room full of people and said she'll come back. She thought about those two facts existing inside the same person, the casual certainty and the 13-month counter-architecture, and what they said together about the shape of a mind that could hold both of them without apparent friction. She thought about her mother's records. Someone had sat in a room with her mother's handwriting and built a forgery from it. Someone had made that specific choice. "File it," she said. Haji-su's pen was already moving. The criminal complaint was filed at 11:15. By noon, Jae-hyun knew. Amara knew he knew, because at 12:07 she received a call from a number she did not recognize, answered it, and heard 3 seconds of silence before the line went dead. The specific 3 seconds of someone who picked up a phone with something to say and then did not say it. She had received that call before. Years ago, early in the marriage, when Jae-hyun was still learning how to argue with someone who did not argue back the way he expected. He would call, he would go silent, he would hang up. He had done it then as a kind of test. She understood he was doing it now as something else. Not a test, an assessment. The sound of a man measuring the distance across a space he had not expected to exist. She sent him a text message. 4 words. "Don't call me again." She turned her phone face up on Haji-su's conference table and waited. At 12:45, attorney Choi Dong-wook, Beko Holdings legal representative, called Haji-su's direct line. Haji-su put it on speaker. Amara sat across the table with her hands flat on the surface and her face entirely still. "We would like to propose a mediation session," Choi said. His voice had lost the formal courtesy of the first call. It had not become hostile. It had become careful, which was a different and more significant register. "Given the complexity of the competing claims," "There are no competing claims," Haji-su said. "There is a divorce filing with clean documentation, and there is a fraudulent lien that is the subject of a criminal complaint filed this morning. Those are not competing claims. One is a legal proceeding and one is a fraud." Attorney "If your client wishes to discuss settlement, the terms are the same as the original filing. My client keeps the inherited trust, the Gyeongju property, with all encumbrances removed, and her professional contracts. Your client keeps the syndicate's assets and the marital property. The original terms remain available until Monday morning." A pause. "And the criminal complaint?" "That is a separate matter proceeding on its own timeline." Another pause. Longer. The sound of a man relaying information with his hand over the receiver. Then, "My client would like to speak with yours directly." Hajisu looked at Amara. Amara shook her head once. That's not available, Hajisu said. The line went quiet for 5 full seconds. Then Choi said, We'll call you back. He hung up. Hajisu set her phone down. He's going to push for the meeting. I know. Do you want to give it to him? Amara thought about that. Not about whether she wanted it. She did not want it. She wanted the clean proceeding, the documented path, the thing that moved through systems rather than through rooms where Kang Jae-hyun had spent 40 years learning how to make people do what he wanted. She thought about whether it was strategically necessary. She thought about what a direct meeting would cost and what it might produce that the legal process wouldn't. She thought about Tae-jun's thumb drive, about the 14-page document with the signature at the bottom of page 2, about the fact that a man who authorized document fraud 13 months ago had just been handed a criminal complaint and had responded by going silent for 45 minutes and then requesting a mediation that was really a conversation. He wanted to look at her. That was what it was. He wanted to be in a room with her and recalibrate. He had been operating for 3 weeks on an incomplete picture of who she was and what she had, and the picture kept revising itself in ways he hadn't anticipated, and she understood, because she had spent 9 years watching him, that what he needed, functionally, was to look at her face and take a new measurement. She was not going to give him that. No meeting, she said. Let the process run. The process ran. It ran faster than anyone expected, which was either a sign that Hajisu's reputation preceded her in the Central District, or a sign that the judge who drew the fraud complaint assignment had a particular distaste for falsified property liens, or both. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. The lien was flagged as contested pending the fraud review. The divorce proceeding continued on its separate track. On Monday morning, Jae-hyun's team did not call with agreement to the original terms. On Monday afternoon, Amara received a different kind of call. It came from a journalist, not a crime reporter, a cultural affairs reporter named Song Ye-rin, who covered the arts and heritage sector for a major Seoul daily, and who had, apparently, been following the work of Brooks Heritage Atelier through the museum world's informal networks for the better part of 6 months. Song had written a short item about the Liam restoration in September. She had noticed the Gyeongju National Museum contract announcement and had been, in the restrained language of a journalist who had done their homework, eager to speak with the founder. Amara had not been ready to speak with journalists in September. She was not certain she was ready now. But she called Hajisu, and Hajisu said after a pause, It depends entirely on what she wants to ask about. She wants to ask about the mill. Then yes, talk about the mill. Talk about the work. Do not talk about the divorce, the lion, or any legal proceedings. Amara called Song Ye-rin back at 4 o'clock. The journalist was brisk and warm simultaneously, a combination that usually indicated genuine curiosity rather than angle fishing. She asked about the restoration methodology. She asked about the loom frames. She asked about Loretta Brooks. Had she seen her mother's connection to Korea's textile industry as unusual? Amara said, My mother believed beautiful things were worth preserving regardless of where they were made. Song said, Can I quote that? Amara said yes. Song asked if she could visit the mill before the piece ran. Amara said she would think about it. She was thinking about it when Choi Dong-wook called Haji-soo again at 5:30 Monday evening. My client has reviewed the situation, Choi said. His voice had lost another layer of something. Not certainty exactly. More like the specific professional warmth that attorneys use to keep interactions from becoming combat. It was stripped now. What was left was functional. He is prepared to agree to the original divorce terms. The lien will be withdrawn by end of week. In exchange, the criminal complaint is dropped. Haji-soo looked at Amara. Amara was looking out the window. No, Amara said. Haji-soo said into the phone, My client declines. Dead silence. Then Choi, very carefully, Attorney Ha. The criminal complaint, if it proceeds, will create significant public exposure for parties beyond my client. The documentation involved touches on business relationships that extend to... I understand what you're suggesting, Haji-soo said. My client's position is that the criminal complaint proceeds independently of the divorce settlement. If your client chooses to agree to the divorce terms, that agreement does not affect the fraud proceeding. If your client does not agree to the divorce terms, the fraud proceeding continues anyway. She paused. There is no version of this conversation where the complaint goes away. A long silence. Then, I'll need to consult with my client. You have until Thursday morning. The call ended. Hajisu set her phone down with the deliberate quiet of someone who has just said the thing they intended to say and is allowing it to settle. Amara turned from the window. He's going to try something else. Yes. What? Hajisu considered. He has two options. He can agree and absorb the criminal exposure. The fraud complaint is against Oh Byung-suk primarily, and against him as authorizing party, but with the right legal structure he can argue distance from the execution. Or, she stopped. Or he makes a move outside the legal process, Amara said. Hajisu did not answer that directly. What she said was, is there anything at the mill that isn't secured? Any personnel who are exposed? Any contractors who might receive unexpected contact? Amara thought about the site manager, a woman named Baek Chun-ja, 61 years old, who had worked restoration in the Gyeongju region for 30 years and had the temperament of someone who had seen every variety of institutional pressure and was not particularly impressed by any of it. She thought about the three conservators she'd hired on contract, two of them young, one of them, Lee Hana, who had a sister working at a Baeko Holdings subsidiary in Busan. She had not thought about Lee Hana's sister until this moment. She pulled out her phone. I need to make a call. She drove to Gyeongju Tuesday morning, not because she had been told to, because she needed to be there. Baek Chun-ja met her at the mill entrance at 10 with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a woman who had already heard something she didn't like. A man came yesterday, she said, without preamble. In the afternoon, said he was from the Gyeongju Business Registry, doing a routine compliance check on new commercial operations. Amara felt her jaw tighten. What did he want? To see the contracts, the restoration agreements, asked about our funding source. Was it fully private? Was there any institutional debt? Were we in arrears on any registered obligations? Baek Chun-ja looked at Amara directly. I told him our attorney handles all compliance documentation and gave him Hajisu's office number. He wrote it down and left. Did he show credentials? A business card. I kept it. She produced it from her coat pocket. Plain card, business registry logo, a name, Young Min Ho. Amara photographed it and sent it to Hajisu's paralegal with a single message. Verify this person against the registry's actual staff roster. The paralegal responded in 11 minutes. No employee by that name on the Gyeongju Business Registry staff list. Amara stood in the entrance of the mill with the cold morning air coming through the gap in the restored doors and felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, something that was not calculation or cold clarity or focused endurance, but something rawer. The physical sensation of being pressed. She knew this feeling. She had felt it across 9 years in a marriage to a man who applied pressure as naturally as other people breathed, and she had learned to receive pressure without showing it changed her, which was a different thing from it not changing her. It always changed her. She was just careful about where she put that change. She put it in her feet. She planted them on the restored stone floor of a mill her mother had bought for her, and she let herself feel, for 30 seconds, the full weight of a powerful man's machinery turning in her direction. The fake compliance officer, the compromised associate, the fraudulent lien, the 13-month counter-architecture. And then she picked up her phone and called Hajisu. He sent someone to the mill, she said. Fake registry credentials. He's trying to build a picture of our vulnerabilities. When? Yesterday afternoon, which means he decided to escalate before Choi called us Monday evening. The offer to drop terms was a distraction. She was moving now, walking through the mill toward the east wing, her boots on the stone echoing back. He wanted to see if we'd negotiate while he gathered information. Hajisu was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he's preparing something physical. Or legal. Something outside the court proceeding that ties up the operation itself. An injunction, a compliance block, a permit challenge. She stopped at the east wing wall. The repaired stonework. The line between damaged and fixed. What permits are we most exposed on? The renovation permits were filed under the mill's original historic preservation designation. If someone challenges the designation, it stalls the commercial operation. For potentially 18 months while the designation is reviewed. Hajisu paused. Amara, I need you to listen to me. He is not going to fight you in court. He does not fight things in court. He is going to apply pressure to every peripheral point until the operation becomes untenable, and he is going to keep doing that until you either agree to terms that include dropping the fraud complaint or you run out of money defending all the peripheral fronts simultaneously. Amara stood very still. How much runway do we have? Hajisu asked. Financially. How long can you defend on multiple fronts? It was the question she had been not asking herself for a week. She had been not asking it because the answer required looking at numbers she had already looked at and had not enjoyed looking at. The trust was intact but not infinite. The mill's commercial revenue was real but early stage. The museum contracts paid on completion schedules that stretched across months, not in lump sums. Her personal savings, the money she had accumulated across 9 years of professional work that she had quietly moved into separate accounts, was enough for the legal fees she had anticipated. It was not enough for a multi-front siege. She did not have indefinite runway. Tell me what we need to make this move fast, she said. We need the fraud hearing to go well on Wednesday. A strong preliminary ruling gives us leverage to force a settlement that includes the criminal admission. If we can get an admission, the divorce terms are clean and we're done. Hajisu's voice was careful. If the preliminary goes poorly, if they've managed to complicate the venue argument, or if the judge is more sympathetic to their documentation challenges than I expect, then we're in a longer fight. What are the odds? On the preliminary, 70-30 in our favor. A pause. The 30% is real. Wednesday was tomorrow. Amara looked at the 6 loom frames under their canvas covers at the far end of the east wing. She had not uncovered them yet. She had been waiting until the legal situation was resolved, waiting until the mill was fully and unambiguously hers, before she uncovered the frames and began the restoration work that was the whole point of everything she had built here. The whole point. Not the legal fight, not the fraud complaint, not the counter-architecture, the loom frames. The work. The thing her mother had believed she would do. She walked to the nearest frame and put her hand on the canvas. She stood there for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and called Song Ye-rin. The interview, she said when the journalist answered. You wanted to see the mill. Can you be in Gyeongju Thursday morning? A brief pause of surprise. Yes, absolutely. I'll send you the... She paused. And bring a photographer. She hung up. She looked at the canvas under her hand. If Wednesday went well, the article would run in a climate of legal resolution and the mill would be introduced to the public from a position of stability. If Wednesday went poorly, if the 30% materialized, if Jae-hyun's machinery had reached further than Haji-soo expected, then the article would run anyway, and a public cultural institution with journalists on record and photographs published in a major Seoul daily was considerably harder to pressure through fake compliance officers and permit challenges than a private operation that nobody outside the museum world had heard of. She was not waiting to be safe before she moved. She was making herself harder to stop. She lifted the canvas from the nearest loom frame and let it fall. The frame underneath was massive, 2 meters tall, hardwood darkened by decades in the dark. Every joint still tight, the heddles gone, but the uprights intact and solid as the day they were made. It smelled of the particular deep wood smell that old machinery carries, the compressed history of use and stillness and waiting. She ran her hands along the beam, solid, patient, exactly where it had been when she first stood in this room and recognized it. Her phone buzzed. Haji-soo. A text. He fired Choi. Retain new counsel. Firm name is Shin and Associates. Amara stared at the message. She knew that name. Shin and Associates was not a divorce firm. Shin and Associates was a litigation powerhouse that handled criminal defense for organized crime-adjacent clients and had a specific, well-documented history of attacking the credibility of opposing witnesses rather than contesting the underlying evidence. They did not argue that the fraud didn't happen. They argued that the person claiming fraud was not credible. She typed back, "How fast can they get up to speed?" Haji-soo's response came in 10 seconds. "They're already up to speed. They were already retained. Choi was the front." Amara looked at the loom frame. He had been preparing 2 legal strategies simultaneously, one for if she negotiated, one for if she didn't. Choi was always the negotiating face. Shin and Associates had always been the weapon behind it. Her phone buzzed again. Not Haji-soo this time. An unknown number. She answered. A woman's voice. Young. controlled but not fully. Ms. Brooks, my name is Seo Yuna. Amara said nothing. I think you know who I am, the woman said. Amara waited. I'm calling because I have something you need to hear, and because I am... A brief pause, the sound of a breath being managed. I am not what you think I am in this situation. I was not informed of certain things. About the lien, about your mother's records. Another breath. I found out 3 days ago, and I have been trying to decide what to do with it. Amara's grip on the phone tightened slightly. What do you have? I have access to his personal files, the ones he keeps encrypted on his home network. I know the access structure because... She stopped. Started again. Because he trusted me with it, before he stopped trusting me with things. A pause. There are communication in those files about the Haidong structure, about the authorization, about a second action he is planning to take before Wednesday's hearing. The East Wing was very quiet. What second action? Amara said. He is going to file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning claiming you are attempting to liquidate marital assets before the divorce settlement is finalized. He will argue the museum contracts represent marital income and must be frozen pending resolution. It will tie up your commercial accounts. If that worked, if the emergency injunction froze her operating accounts before Wednesday's hearing, she could not pay Hajisu's fees for the fraud proceeding, could not pay the mill's operating costs, could not... Why are you telling me this? She said. The silence on the line was the silence of someone answering a question that costs them something. Because he used my name on one of the Haidong authorization documents, Seo Yuna said, without my knowledge, without my consent, as a co-authorizing party. Her voice had gone flat, the flatness of someone who has finished being shocked and is now only angry. And because the woman he is trying to destroy built something real. And I have been sitting in his house for 3 months watching him try to stop her, and I am... She stopped. Her breath was uneven now. I am done sitting in his house. Amara stood in the east wing of her mother's mill with her hand on a 200-year-old loom frame and the phone pressed hard against her ear, and felt the situation shift beneath her feet like the ground had relocated itself without warning. An emergency injunction, filed tomorrow morning, and a witness who had access to the files that proved it was coordinated, the same files that could link the Haidong authorization to the second legal action, establishing a pattern of deliberate legal obstruction rather than individual fraud. A pattern was not one crime. A pattern was a case. Ms. Seo, she said very carefully, I need you to not do anything with those files until I call you back in 30 minutes. Okay, Yuna said. Her voice was steadier now. The steadiness of someone who has made a decision they've been building toward without knowing it. I'll wait. Amara ended the call and immediately dialed Hajisu. The line connected on the first ring. We have a witness, Amara said. Hajisu did not say anything for 3 full seconds after Amara said we have a witness. Then, tell me everything, exactly as she said it. Amara told her. Standing in the east wing beside the uncovered loom frame, her voice low and even, she repeated Seo Yuna's words as accurately as she could. The encrypted files, the co-authorization without consent, the emergency injunction planned for tomorrow morning. She did not editorialize. She gave Hajisu the facts in the order they had arrived. Hajisu listened without interrupting. When Amara finished, there was another silence, shorter this time, the silence of a mind already moving. She needs to come in tonight, Hajisu said. Not tomorrow, tonight. If he files the injunction before we can establish her testimony, the accounts freeze, and we spend the next 3 days in emergency motions instead of preparing for Wednesday's fraud hearing. She paused. Can she come in tonight? I don't know. She said she'd wait for my call. Call her now. I need her in my office by 8. Amara called Yuna back. The line rang 4 times. Amara counted them. On the 4th ring, Ms. Brooks. Can you come to Seoul tonight, to my attorney's office? A silence. Not long. He'll notice if I leave. Is he there now? He's in a meeting, in the study. He's been in there since 4. Amara thought about the geography. The Gangnam office tower where Hajisu worked. The mansion in the northern residential district where Yuna was currently standing. The drive between them. You have a window, she said. You know that. Another silence. Amara heard something in the background, a distant door, the particular acoustic quality of a large house absorbing sound. She heard Yuna's breathing, controlled but effortful, the breathing of someone making a calculation that feels like jumping. "I'll need the files," Yuna said. "I can't testify to documents I don't bring. Can you get them?" "I have access." He gave me access. A pause. "That's what I keep thinking about. He gave me the codes because he trusted me. And then he put my name on a fraud document without telling me. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I have been trying to make them fit together for 3 days, and they don't fit." "They don't fit," Amara said quietly, "because one of them was real, and one of them was use." Yuna didn't respond to that immediately. When she did, her voice had settled into something harder. "I'll be there by 8. Hajisu's paralegal met CO Yuna in the building lobby at 7:54 and brought her up without making her wait at reception, which was a courtesy that cost nothing and communicated everything about how seriously the office was taking the next 12 hours. Yuna arrived in Hajisu's conference room looking like someone who had driven fast and thought faster. Coat slightly damp from the outside air, a leather portfolio under her arm, her face composed in the specific way of someone who has made a decision and is not revisiting it. Amara was already there. She had driven back from Gyeongju in 3 hours and 40 minutes for the second time in a week. They looked at each other across the conference table. Amara had expected this moment to feel complicated. It did not feel complicated. It felt, instead, like the recognition of two people who had been on opposite sides of a situation that turned out to have more sides than either of them understood at the start. "Thank you for coming," Amara said. Yuna set the portfolio on the table. "I don't want your thanks. I want to be clear that I'm not doing this for you." She sat down. "I'm doing this because my name is on a document I didn't sign, authorizing a fraud I didn't know about, and I am not going to absorb that consequence without fighting it." "I know," Amara said, "and I want to be clear that I am not—" Yuna stopped, pressed her lips together. "I am not apologizing for existing in his life. I didn't know the full shape of his marriage. People present themselves the way they want to be seen. I saw what he showed me." "I'm not asking you to apologize for anything," Amara said. Yuna looked at her, directly, fully, for the first time. She was 30 years old and she was not naive, and she had, evidently, spent the last 3 days doing something that required more honesty than most people managed, looking at a situation she had been comfortable inside and seeing it accurately. That cost something. Amara could see where it had cost her in the set of her shoulders and the particular tightness around her eyes. "All right," Yuna said. She opened the portfolio. "Let me show you what I brought." The files were comprehensive. Whatever Jae-hyun's other qualities, he was an organized man. His personal records were clean, chronological, and thorough in the way of someone who believed documentation was power. The encrypted folder Yuna had accessed contained, among other things, the original authorization memo for Haedong Capital Partners in its unredacted form, with email chain attached, 3 subsequent memos directing Oh Byung-suk on the lien execution timeline, and a draft filing for the emergency injunction, dated 2 days ago, with a cover note directing Shin and Associates to file at 9 a.m. Wednesday, 2 hours before the fraud hearing was scheduled to begin. The cover note was on his personal letterhead. His personal, not Baco Holdings. His own name at the top. Hajisu read the draft injunction with the focused quiet of someone reading a weapon. She read it twice. She put it down. "If this files at 9 tomorrow morning," she said, "and the judge grants a temporary freeze pending hearing, which is possible, emergency injunctions have a low initial threshold. Our operating accounts are locked before we walk into the fraud hearing at 11. She looked at Amara. "We walk in with our funding structure under challenge. Shin and Associates will use that to argue our client is financially destabilized, which they'll frame as evidence that the mill operation is not the independent enterprise it claims to be, but rather an entity dependent on disputed marital resources." She paused. "It's designed to make us look exactly like what we're not." "Can we counterfile tonight?" Amar asked. "I can file a preemptive motion opposing the injunction before 9 a.m. If I have documentation showing the injunction is part of a coordinated legal obstruction strategy." Hajisu tapped the cover note. "This is that documentation, combined with Ms. Seo's testimony that she found it in his personal files, combined with the Haedong authorization chain. I can argue to the Central District Duty Judge tonight that an emergency counter-motion is warranted to prevent a coordinated attack on the divorce proceedings." "Tonight," Amara said. I need 2 hours to draft it. I need Miss Seo to sign a sworn statement, and I need to reach the duty judge, which Hajisu checked her watch. It's 8:43. The Central District Duty Judge takes emergency motions until 10:30. 47 minutes. Start drafting, Amara said. Hajisu was already typing. The duty judge's name was Han Sung-bai, and he had been on the Central District bench for 19 years, and he had, according to the brief research, Hajisu's paralegal ran in the 20 minutes she wasn't otherwise occupied, a documented history of responding to coordinated legal obstruction with the particular coldness of a man who took the integrity of his court personally. He received Hajisu's emergency motion at 10:18. He read it at 10:26. He called Hajisu's direct line at 10:41. Amara sat in the conference room and listened to Hajisu's side of the conversation, which consisted primarily of yes, Your Honor, and the documentation supports that conclusion, and yes, we can have the full file to chambers by 7 a.m. Hajisu hung up. She looked at Amara. He's issuing a temporary protective order on the operating accounts tonight. Shin and Associates cannot move to freeze them without coming before him first, and he has specifically noted that any such motion will be reviewed in the context of the preemptive filing. She paused. He used the phrase coordinated interference. His words. Seo Yuna, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table for the past hour, exhaled slowly. It was the first visible release of tension she had shown all evening. Is that good? She asked. For us? Yes. Hajisu sat down. For your signed statement, it will be part of the court record. You understand that? I understand. His attorneys will see it. I know. He will see it. Yuna looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. Then he'll see it. Wednesday morning arrived with the flat, colorless light of a sole November that had run out of anything to offer except the basic fact of continuing. Amara was at Hajisu's office by 7. Yuna had spent the night in a hotel in Gangnam. Hajisu had arranged it, practical and without comment, and Yuna had accepted with the same quality of practicality. She arrived at the office at 7:15 with coffee for herself and nothing else, which Amara thought was honest. The fraud hearing was at 11. The morning moved slowly and then suddenly fast, the way time moves when you are waiting for something that will change the shape of what comes after. At 9:07, Shin and Associates filed the emergency injunction anyway. Hajisu's paralegal flagged it the moment it hit the system. Hajisu read the notification, set it down, and said, Judge Han will see it in approximately 4 minutes. She did not appear alarmed. She appeared like someone watching a predicted thing happen on schedule. At 9:17, Judge Han issued a stay on the injunction pending review at the 11 o'clock hearing. He consolidated the emergency injunction with the fraud hearing. Both matters would be heard simultaneously. At 9:18, Amara's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Kang Jae-hyun. She looked at the phone for a moment. Her pulse was steady. She noted that because she had been monitoring it all morning the way you monitor something you want to understand. It was steady. Her hands were warm. She was tired in the deep way of someone who has not slept enough for 2 weeks, but whose body has decided sleep can wait. She answered. I want to talk to you, he said. No preamble. His voice was different from the version of it she had been carrying in her memory, lower, stripped of the managed authority he usually deployed. Just his voice, the one underneath the performance. She had heard it rarely, twice maybe in 9 years, in moments when he forgot to maintain the surface. There's nothing to talk about, she said. There's a hearing in under 2 hours. Before the hearing? No. A silence. Amara. The way he said her name was different too. She noticed that. She filed it. Jae-hyun, she said. I'm going to say this once. Every move you have made in the last 3 weeks, the lien, the Haedong structure, the fake compliance officer at the mill, the injunction strategy with Shin and Associates that you planned 2 weeks before you let Choi pretend to negotiate, all of it is documented. All of it is in front of a judge who has already used the phrase coordinated interference. There is no version of a conversation between us right now that changes that. Silence. You used my mother's records, she said. And that was when her voice changed slightly. Not breaking, nothing so readable as that, but a different texture, like something was pressing against the inside of it. You used her financial records to forge a document. She has been dead for 4 years. She cannot defend herself. And you used her name. More silence. The specific silence of someone who has no prepared response because they did not expect the conversation to go there. He had expected, she understood, a negotiation, or anger, or the wounded pride of a woman asking why. He had not expected her to name the specific thing that was the worst thing. I didn't authorize. You signed the memo. Nothing. I have the original, she said. Taejun gave it to me. The silence on that side of the line became very different. It became the silence of a man realizing the exact perimeter of what has been lost and finding it larger than he'd calculated. I'll see you in court, she said, and ended the call. She put the phone in her bag. She looked at the wall of Haji-su's conference room, a plain wall, off-white, with a small print of a traditional Korean landscape in a plain frame. She looked at it for about 10 seconds. Then she picked up her coffee and drank what was left of it, cold by now, and stood up. I need some air, she said to no one in particular. I'll be back in 15 minutes. She took the elevator down and stood outside the building on the Gangnam sidewalk in the November cold and breathed. Just breathed. The city moved around her with its complete indifference, which she found, unexpectedly, comforting. Nobody on this sidewalk knew who she was or what was happening in the 14th floor conference room above them, or what her mother's name was. The city did not require her to be anything in particular. She found that, in this moment, to be a very fine quality in a city. She thought about her mother, about Loretta Brooks, who had moved money quietly through decades, who had noticed an abandoned mill in a country her daughter loved and bought it without saying anything, who had written a letter that began, "Baby, if you are reading this at a bank rather than at my kitchen table." She thought about the fact that the letter was in her coat pocket. Had been in her coat pocket since the vault. She reached in and touched the sealed envelope and did not open it. Not yet. She went back upstairs. The hearing room was smaller than Amara had expected. She had been in larger conference rooms. The judge's bench was elevated, but not dramatically so, and Judge Han was a compact man in his mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead in the particular manner of someone who has spent 2 decades listening to people try to make complicated things sound simple and has developed a specific impatience with the attempt. Jae-hyun was there. She had known he would be there. She had prepared herself for the fact of him being there, the physical reality of him in a room, the way he occupied space, the particular gravitational quality of a man accustomed to being the most powerful person present. She had prepared herself, and it still required a specific internal adjustment, something she felt in her sternum, when she walked in and he was already seated at the respondent's table with 2 Shin & Associates attorneys arranged beside him and Taejun behind him against the wall. Taejun looked at her when she entered. She looked back at him for a moment. He gave her nothing readable. She gave him nothing back. They had conducted their transaction on the phone. It was finished. Jae-hyun did not look up when she entered. She noted that. Haji-su arranged her files with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this many times and has stopped finding it stressful and started finding it clarifying. She glanced at Amara once, a look that said, "Ready?" And Amara gave a small nod that said, "Yes." Judge Han called the session to order and spent the first 12 minutes establishing procedural clarity, confirming the consolidation of the fraud hearing and the emergency injunction review, confirming that all parties understood the scope. His voice was dry and direct, and he asked the Shin & Associates lead attorney, a man named Kwon Tae-yong, to explain the basis for the emergency injunction in 2 minutes or less. Kwon spent 3 minutes explaining it, and Judge Han interrupted him at the 2-minute mark and said, "I've read the filing. Counsel, I want you to explain to me why this filing was prepared 14 days before it was submitted." A silence. The metadata on the draft document provided to this court by opposing counsel shows a creation date 14 days prior to submission, Judge Han said, which means this was not an emergency response to new information. This was a planned action held in reserve. I want to understand the explanation for that. Kwon's composure was professional grade. He did not visibly flinch. He said, "Your Honor, the filing was prepared as a precautionary measure during the initial stages of a precautionary emergency injunction," Judge Han said. He said it very flatly. Kwon adjusted his approach. He said that the filing's preparation date did not reflect the emergency basis, that the actual emergency arose from new information about asset movements that counsel. Judge Han took his reading glasses off his forehead and put them on. He picked up a page from the file in front of him. The coordinating communication attached to Exhibit C, which is a memo on the respondent's personal letterhead, directs your firm to file this injunction on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. It does not direct you to file it when an emergency arises. It specifies a time. He set the page down. That is a schedule, not an emergency. The room was very quiet. Haji-Su did not allow herself any visible reaction. Amara, watching her, thought that was one of the more disciplined things she had witnessed in recent memory. The hearing ran for 2 hours and 17 minutes. Haji-Su presented the Haedong fraud documentation in sequence, the authorization chain, the forgery evidence, the original Loretta Brooks financial records demonstrating no predating debt, the Dongyang breach documentation, and SEO Yuna's sworn statement establishing that the authorization memo was genuine and that a co-authorizing party, Yuna herself, had not consented to or been informed of its existence. Kwon objected to the sworn statement's admissibility on grounds of chain of custody. Judge Han overruled him and said the weight of the statement would be assessed with appropriate scrutiny. Oh Byung-suk's name appeared in the record 7 times. Jae-hyun's authorization signature appeared in the record twice, both times read aloud by Haji-Su in a voice that was entirely without drama, which made it, Amara thought, considerably more devastating than drama would have. At one point, approximately 90 minutes in, she looked at Jae-hyun. He was looking at the table. His hands were folded in front of him on the surface, still, the way they went still when he was maintaining control by main force. She had seen those hands still like that before. She knew what it cost. She looked away. Judge Han recessed for 20 minutes at 12:45. Haji-Su walked Amara into the hallway. He's going to rule on the injunction first, she said quietly. I expect him to deny it. The fraud hearing ruling will take longer, possibly a separate session in the next week. But the Shin and Associates partner just had a conversation with Kwon in the hallway that I observed from a distance. And Kwon's body language was not that of a man who believes his position is strong. She paused. I think they're going to try to settle before the ruling. On what terms? That's what we're about to find out. At 1:07, as they were filing back into the hearing room, Kwon approached Haji-Su with the particular posture of someone making a request they know will cost them. He spoke quietly for about 45 seconds. Haji-Su listened. She turned to Amara. They want a 10-minute recess to discuss settlement. Amara looked past Kwon toward the hearing room. She could see the back of Jae-hyun's head through the open door, the stillness of his shoulders, the careful architecture of a man holding a position. What are they offering? She asked. Haji-Su looked at Kwon. Kwon said, full agreement to the original divorce terms. Lien withdrawn. All encumbrances removed from the Gyeongju property. No contest on the trust or the commercial contracts. He paused. In exchange for the fraud complaint being withdrawn and the criminal proceeding not being pursued. Amara said, no. Kwon blinked, just slightly. The divorce terms, yes. The property, yes. But the fraud complaint is not a bargaining chip. She looked at Kwon directly. Oh Byung-suk executed a forgery using a dead woman's financial records. That has consequences regardless of what happens with the divorce. The criminal proceeding continues. Kwon said he would relay that. Haji-Su said, you have 5 minutes. He went back. There was a conversation at the respondents' table that Amara did not watch because she was looking at the window. A high, narrow window with the November sky gray and flat beyond it, and thinking about nothing in particular, or thinking about everything without being able to identify any single thought, the particular blankness of a person who has spent their available cognitive resource on the getting here and now must wait for the here to do what it does. Haji-Su touched her arm lightly. He agreed. Amara looked at her. He agreed to the divorce terms and accepted that the criminal proceeding continues. His attorneys will argue Oh Byung-suk acted with excessive initiative beyond his authorization. That's the defense they'll build. Haji-Su's voice was even. It's not certain to succeed, but it's not our problem. Our problem is resolved. Amara looked at the hearing room door. It's done, she said. The judge will formalize it in the ruling, but yes, it's done. She stood in the hallway outside a small hearing room in the Central District and felt the thing she had been holding for 3 weeks, the vigilance, the constant forward-leaning weight of it, begin, very slowly, to release. Not all at once. Not in a rush. The way a fist unclenches gradually when the reason for clenching is gone. One finger at a time. She thought, my mother would have said something practical right now. Loretta Brooks was not a woman who marked moments with ceremony. She would have said, good, now let's eat something. Or, good, now what's next? The ceremony was in the doing of the thing. The arrival was just the place where you stopped running. Amara pressed her back against the hallway wall and closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. When she opened them, Taejun was standing 10 feet away, his coat on, watching her. Not with the assessment face, not with the managed neutrality he had worn for 18 years in rooms full of powerful people. With something quieter, something that might have been, in different circumstances, respect. She looked at him. He gave a very slight nod. She gave one back. That was all. He turned and walked toward the elevator. She never saw Baek Taejun again. The divorce was finalized 22 days later, in a proceeding that lasted 40 minutes and produced no drama. Tae-hyun was not present. His attorneys handled the formalities. Amara sat beside Ha Ji-soo and signed the documents that a clerk placed in front of her and watched the last 9 years of her life convert, sheet by sheet, into paper that said she was free. Ha Ji-soo walked her out of the courthouse. On the steps, in the December cold, she said, "What happens now?" Amara thought about it. "I go back to Gyeongju. The loom frames. The loom frames." She looked at the street. "I have a journalist coming, Song Ye-rin. She rescheduled twice because of everything. She's coming Saturday." Ha Ji-soo nodded. Then, with the particular warmth of someone who keeps it banked and releases it carefully, "Your mother would be very—" "I know," Amara said. "She'd also tell me to eat lunch before I drove 4 hours." Ha Ji-soo laughed. One short, genuine laugh. "Go eat lunch." They parted at the bottom of the steps. Amara walked to her car. She sat inside it for a moment with the engine off and reached into her coat pocket and took out the sealed envelope. She had carried it for 3 weeks. She opened it. Her mother's handwriting, the particular forward lean of it, the way she formed her lowercase g's, covered 2 pages of plain notepaper. Amara read slowly. The cold of the car settled around her, but she didn't notice it. She read the whole thing. When she was done, she sat with the pages in her hands and looked through the windshield at the courthouse steps, where 2 strangers were having an ordinary conversation about something with no weight at all. The letter did not say anything prophetic. It did not say, "I knew this would happen," or "I built you a way out because I knew you'd need one." It said, "I bought a building because I believe you should have something that is entirely yours, and I know you well enough to know you'd never buy it for yourself." It said, "The floor needs work and the roof needs replacing and the whole east wall is suspect, but so was everything I ever gave you that turned out to be worth anything." It said, "I am not going to give you advice because you are 40 years old, and if I haven't given you the advice by now, it's too late, and also you don't need it." It said, "Near the end, what I want for you is what I always wanted, which is not safety exactly, because safety is a thing you build for yourself and nobody can give you. What I want for you is a room where the work you do is the work that matters, and where the person who decides that is you." And then, in the last line, in handwriting that was slightly different from the rest, larger, as if she had stopped and come back to it, "I bought you a silk mill, baby. That's all. Go make something." Amara sat in the cold car with the letter in her hands for a long time. Long enough that the light changed around her. Long enough that the 2 strangers on the courthouse steps finished their conversation and went their separate ways. Then she folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and started the car. Son Ye-rin was 34 years old and had been covering cultural affairs for 6 years and had developed, over that time, the particular skill of knowing when to stop asking questions and simply observe. She had arrived at the mill Saturday morning with a photographer named Dong-hyun, who moved quietly and shot without directing anyone to do anything, which was the best kind of photographer. Amara walked them through the mill. Not the legal history, not the 3 weeks of hearings and fraud complaints and emergency motions. The mill. The original structure, which dated to the late Joseon period. The way the building had been modified 3 times across its history, she could show you where each modification met the original stonework, could trace with her hand the line between eras. The loom frames, now fully uncovered, all 6 of them, standing in the east wing in the December light that came through the restored windows and landed on the hardwood with the quality of something that had been waiting to happen. Song took notes in a small notebook with a pen, old-fashioned, and she asked questions that were good, specific, material, grounded in what she was seeing rather than in the story she had presumably constructed before arriving. She asked about the conservation methodology for the Liam Commission. She asked what the loom frames would eventually produce. She asked about Loretta Brooks, not intrusively, just, "Tell me about your mother and this place." Amara told her. The Atlanta kitchen table. The letter. The floor needs work and the roof needs replacing. She didn't say all of it. She said enough. Donghyun photographed the loom frames. He photographed Amara's hands on the beam of the nearest one. She didn't pose. She was just standing there, and he took the shot. He photographed the line in the east wing wall where the new mortar met the old stone. He photographed the light on the floor. At the end of the walkthrough, Song looked at her notes and then looked up. "Can I ask you something that's not about the mill?" Amara looked at her. "Depends on the question." Song seemed to consider how to frame it. "You started this in the middle of... I'm not going to pretend I don't know there was a personal situation. I did my background. But I want to know, was this always the plan? The atelier? Or was it something you built toward because you needed it?" Amara thought about that. About the honest answer, which was not simple. "Both," she said finally. "I knew what I wanted to build. I didn't know I'd have to fight this hard to keep it." She looked at the loom frames. "But I think the fighting made the building mean something different. Not more, just different. Like the difference between a thing you did because you could and a thing you did because it was the only door you could see." Song wrote that down. The article ran the following Thursday in the Cultural Affairs section, with Dong-hyun's photograph of the loom frames on the front of the section and a smaller photograph of Amara's hands on the beam inset in the first column. The headline was, "She restored a forgotten mill. Now she's restoring what it held." Hajisu texted, "Page 1 of the section. Your mother would have cut it out and put it on the refrigerator." Amara texted back a single period, which was her version of agreement when words felt like too much. Within a week, the article had produced 2 inquiries from institutions she had not previously worked with: a museum in Osaka and a heritage foundation in London that specialized in historic textile preservation and had been, apparently, looking for a Korean partner with specific expertise in royal court fabric restoration. Hajisu's paralegal scanned the foundation's inquiry letter and sent it to Amara with a note that said simply, "Good problem. It was a good problem." Oh Byung-suk was formally charged in January with document fraud and fraudulent lion registration. His defense, as Hajisu had predicted, argued that he had acted beyond the scope of his authorization, an argument that was complicated by the existence of Jae-hyun's signed memo, but not, as it turned out, completely negated by it, because the memo's language was careful enough to allow interpretive space that a skilled criminal defense team could work with. The proceeding extended across several months. Amara did not attend any of the hearings. Hajisu attended and updated her in brief messages that she read and filed and did not dwell on, because the criminal proceeding was the system doing its work, and her presence inside it was not required and would not have helped anything. What she heard, through Hajisu's periodic updates, was that Kang Jae-hyun's involvement remained legally ambiguous. The authorization memo established intent, but intent without direct execution was territory. The court would navigate slowly. What she heard, through channels that were less formal, was that the Baeko syndicate had a difficult winter. Park Sung-mo had restructured several of his business relationships. Director Lim had publicly declined a project he would previously have accepted without comment. The handshakes that held that world together were a currency, and currencies fluctuated, and the fluctuation had begun the night Jae-hyun rested his hand on another woman's waist, at a table where his partners ate food, his wife had arranged and looked at flowers, his wife had selected and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and then did nothing, for the same reason, except raise a glass. CO Yuna had moved out of the mansion the morning after the hearing. Hajisu's paralegal had confirmed this through a property management contact, not because it was Amara's business, but because it was information that bore on potential future legal actions. Amara heard it, noted it, and did not think about it more than briefly. Yuna had made her calculation. The calculation had cost her something. What it cost and what she did next were hers to manage, and Amara had enough of her own. She did not think about Jaehyun often. When she did, it was not in the way she had expected, not with the particular weight of 9 years, not with the inventory of everything that went wrong, not with the accumulated catalog of small indignities that she had filed away without examining. She thought about him the way you think about a place you lived for a long time and left. Specific images without narrative, sensory details without emotional instruction. His hands, which were good hands, careful in the way they handled things. The one time she had seen him genuinely surprised, at an auction, years ago, a damaged court robe in a glass case, when she explained what she was looking at, and he listened with real attention. The way his face was in sleep, which was the only time it let go of the performance completely. She had watched him sleep sometimes, in the early years, and thought, there is a person in there who might have been something different. She still believed that was true. She had simply stopped being responsible for it. March arrived in Gyeongju with the particular tenderness of a spring that wasn't certain yet whether it had committed. Cold mornings, warmer afternoons, the mist still sitting on the fields at dawn when Amara drove from the apartment she had rented in the city, a real apartment now, not the folding cot, to the mill. She had been restoring the first loom frame for 6 weeks. The work was slow. It was supposed to be slow. Conservation work that went fast was not conservation. It was something else, something that looked similar from a distance but did not hold. The frame required cleaning, stabilization of the original joinery, replacement of several secondary components with period-appropriate materials she had sourced through a timber specialist in Andong. She documented everything, every phase photographed, measured, recorded in the conservation log that would eventually accompany the frame as part of its institutional history. Baek Chunja managed the site and had developed over the months of working together a communication style with Amara that consisted mostly of practical information delivered without ceremony and punctuated by occasional observations that were, Amara thought, among the most useful things anyone said to her. One morning in March, Chunja looked at the work Amara was doing on the frame's upper heddle support and said, "You're not hurrying it." "No." The Liam conservators always hurry the last phase. They want to be done. "I know." "You don't want to be done." Amara looked at the frame, at the wood that had been waiting in the dark for decades. "I want to finish it right." Chunja nodded slowly. "Same thing, for people who know what they're doing." "What?" The London Foundation visit happened in April. A woman named Margaret Osei-Bonsu, the Foundation's Director of Partnerships, flew from London to Gyeongju specifically to see the mill before committing to a formal collaboration agreement. She was 62 years old and had spent 30 years in heritage preservation across 4 continents, and she arrived at the mill on a Tuesday morning and spent 4 hours saying very little and observing a great deal, which Amara recognized as the behavior of someone who knew that what you noticed before you spoke was more reliable than what you said. At the end of the 4 hours, standing in the east wing with the afternoon light on the loom frames and the smell of the conservation treatment, Amara had been applying still faintly in the air. Margaret said, "Your mother bought this." "Yes." "She never saw it restored." "No." Margaret looked at the frames. "She had very good judgment." Amara pressed her lips together, just briefly. She had very good judgment. The partnership agreement was signed in June. Brooks Heritage Atelier became a formal institutional partner of the Osei-Bonsu Heritage Foundation, with collaborative projects planned across the next 3 years involving Korean, West African, and Southeast Asian historic textile collections. The agreement was reported in 2 trade publications and 1 major cultural affairs journal. Hajisu sent the journal article with the message, "I'm sending you my invoice." Amara called her and they spoke for 20 minutes, which was the longest personal conversation they had ever had. And at the end of it, Hajisu said, "I don't often feel like I did the right work at the right time. I felt that about this." Amara said, "Me too." She meant it. On a morning in late June that was warm enough to have the mill's main doors open, Amara finished the restoration of the first loom frame. She did it quietly. Chunja was there, and Lee Hana, and the 2 other conservators, and they were all working on their own tasks, and the finishing happened without announcement, which was how Amara had wanted it. She tightened the last replacement component, checked the alignment of the frame's uprights for the 4th time, documented the final phase in the log with the date and her signature, and then stepped back. The frame stood in the June light. 2 meters tall, hardwood dark with age, every joint clean and correctly held, the structure patient and solid and ready, in the way that restored things are ready. Not new, not pretending to be new, carrying every year of its history in its grain and weight, and the particular character of what has survived without being falsified. She put her hand on it. The wood was warm. The light had been on it all morning. She stood there for a while. The sounds of the mill around her, Chunja's voice somewhere in the west wing, Lihana's careful footsteps, the faint sound of birds through the open doors, the creak of the building settling into the warm day, the smell of the conservation materials and old stone and the clean outdoor air. She thought about the rain in Seoul 9 months ago on a Friday night. She thought about the marble floor and the ring she had placed on it, and the door she had walked back through into the storm. She thought about 47,001 in her coat pocket and a taxi and an address in Insadong. She thought about Ms. Yoon's back room and the bowl of jigai and the notebook with its horizontal marks, each one a thing in order, each one a piece of a floor she had been building under herself for over a year before she needed to stand on it. She thought about her mother's letter. Go make something. She had made something, not without cost. She had paid for it in the specific currency of a woman who builds quietly in the margins of a life that is not looking at her, in the careful accumulation of resources that could not be seen as resources, in the discipline of not taking up the space she was not being given, in the 18 months of preparation that had looked, from the outside, like nothing, and had been, from the inside, everything. She had paid in the 2 weeks of a legal fight that had required her to be colder and more strategic than she had known she could sustain. She had paid in 4 seconds of standing in a doorway watching a man who had not looked at her in years, and in the walk back into the rain afterward, and in the way the ring felt on the table and then felt not on her hand. She had paid. The thing she had built was worth what she had paid for it. She did not believe it was worth it in the sense that the cost was acceptable. Some costs are not acceptable, and the uses of her mother's name were not acceptable, and she would not tell herself a tidy story in which everything was necessary and pain was instructive and betrayal built character. She had paid costs that should not have been costs. She knew that. She held it cleanly and did not set it down because setting it down entirely would be a kind of dishonesty about what had happened. But she had made something. She took her hand from the frame. She picked up the conservation log and walked to the site office and made the final entry. Frame 1 restoration complete. June. She signed it. She closed the log. Through the office window she could see the east wing, the 5 remaining frames still in their stages of work, the afternoon light shifting across the stone, the open doors letting in the June air. Somewhere in the distance, down the road toward the city, a car was moving through the countryside. Someone going somewhere, someone returning. She put the pen down. She went back into the east wing. She put her hands on the second frame and began.